Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has just banned sanctuary cities. From the Daily Caller, they say that he signed a bill into law, an anti-sanctuary bill. So the bill is essentially going to make it illegal for cities within the state to implement sanctuary policies. They say that at a ceremony in the Okaloosa County Board of Commissioners, alongside Florida GOP Rep. Matt Gaetz, he added his signature to SB 168. The bill requires state and local governments to honor retainers made by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. There's a really, really interesting question in whether or not a local jurisdiction has a right to reject or supersede federal law. For me, the question arises when we see the DEA raids of like the Obama era. When California was like, hey, we're going to do medical marijuana, and then, Obama's DEA would go and raid these stores. We're like, why are you doing that? If California wants to smoke weed, let California smoke weed. Why should the feds go in? And so it becomes a really, really interesting problem. Should the federal government be able to tell the states what they can or can't do? Man, I kind of feel like they shouldn't, right? Like the federal government provides for the common defense and does have certain roles in terms of federal regulation and laws. So to an extent, yes. But I like small government. I'm a more libertarian left kind of person. I don't like the idea of a massive authoritarian system telling you can't live the way your local jurisdiction should live. So this issue of sanctuary cities, man, is really, really complicated. I think about the Electoral College, right? If my town has a water supply, you shouldn't be able to outvote me and take my water away, right? But then when we look at how federal laws are enacted, it kind of does come down to certain situations like this. I think this is why I love America so much. Seriously. It's the three branches of government: judicial, legislative, executive, because that's what judges are for. We have the law from the legislative branch, but then the judges interpret and determine what is fair and what makes sense, and the executive branch enforces. So I think about these problems and I'm like, listen, whether or not I should be able to have my water taken away by vote is very, very different as to whether or not I should be able to legally grow and sell pot or something like that, or harbor illegal immigrants. Just because, some laws are unjust and some are just doesn't mean they're all going to be the same in every circumstance. Judges interpret. So I was reading this story and admittedly I'm like, man, should cities be allowed to be sanctuary cities? They're violating federal law, but there are some circumstances where that's a good thing and the feds shouldn't have, authority over the states. Admittedly, it's complicated. I don't think I have a good answer for this one. I typically have a pretty strong opinion falling on the side of liberty, and it gets complicated then when you recognize that if a state like Florida allows illegal immigrants to be protected from ICE or CBP, well, those people may eventually leave and go into other jurisdictions, negatively impacting other places that don't agree. At the same time, if those places don't have sanctuary laws, they could just turn over the illegal immigrants to ICE and CBP. So it really is an interesting debate, especially as I'm trying to kind of break apart the freedom versus federal restrictions. In the end, I think ultimately sanctuary city laws are problematic in that we're a nation, we have citizens, and we provide for each other and our common defense. I believe we should grant asylum to those who need it, and refugee status to those who need it. And we should not allow those who would exploit that system to take advantage of us. I believe immigration should all be done legally because there's a reason why we have a legal process for safety, security, not just for us, but for those coming here. So it's interesting, but let me stop prattling. I had an ethical conundrum question on should the federal government be allowed to do this? But let's read more. Earlier this year, Governor DeSantis asked the Florida legislature to present him with meaningful legislation to uphold the rule of law and ensure that no city or country jurisdiction or county jurisdiction can get in the way of Florida's cooperation with our federal partners to enforce immigration law. That's from Helen Fair, a DeSantis spokeswoman, writing in an email. Public safety is paramount, and local law enforcement agencies can and should work with the federal government to ensure that accountability and justice are won in our state. DeSantis' bill signing marks a further divide in how conservative and liberal states deal with federal immigration enforcement. 10 states, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Iowa, Arizona, Texas, North Carolina, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Missouri, have laws that mandate state and local governments help ICE apprehend suspected illegal immigrants. On the other hand, a growing number of blue-leaning states have passed laws that strictly prohibit local law enforcement from honoring ICE detainers. Colorado and Washington, both states run by Democratic-controlled legislatures and governors, signed sanctuary bills into law as recently as May. We are seeing the era of the sanctuary state, that if you're in a state, the local law enforcement won't cooperate. Interesting problem. And I feel like what we're seeing with illegal immigration may turn into the major component of the coming civil conflict of whatever it is. There was a thread on Twitter where people were saying the U.S. is operating concentration camps and all these other things, and that's where the rhetoric is headed, whether you want to agree with it or not. So we see here looking very governorly. I'm kidding. I'm not unkidding. I was just making a stupid comment. While ICE made it clear that they do not take positions on specific legislation, the agency reiterated the consequences to public safety when local officials refused to cooperate with their efforts, saying, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement places detainers on individuals who have been arrested on local criminal charges and who are suspected of being deportable so that ICE can take custody of that person when he or she is released from local custody. When law enforcement agencies fail to honor immigration detainers and release serious criminal offenders onto the streets, it undermines ICE's ability to protect public safety and carry out its mission. They said in a statement to the Daily Caller News Foundation. So I want to make sure we can draw one distinction between rhetoric of old and rhetoric of today. The individuals that ICE is seeking to deport are actual criminals. It's not like ICE is necessarily just taking a random individual like, oh, you're not supposed to be here, you're being deported. Certainly they do that. But in this particular instance, they're talking about detainers. They're talking about people who have broken the law, and they're saying, hey, man, this person broke the law. We should deport them, right? Are we going to keep them in our jails? It's really, really scary, in my opinion, what we're seeing in terms of rhetoric. There's absolutely some very disgusting facilities where illegal immigrants are being held, and I don't agree with people being held in ways that are not humane. I also recognize that we're at a budget crunch. The Democrats aren't funding border security the way Trump wants. We've got major newspapers saying you guys got to give Trump his money, and the Democrats don't do it. And then you end up with overcrowding, and these people keep coming. In this thread, they talked about a place called the Freezer and the Dog Pound, and they sound absolutely disgusting and terrifying, and it makes me sick to my stomach to think about. I also think about what's the alternative? Throw the people in the desert? Just leave them on the border? I honestly don't know. I really don't. I don't think we're talking about a situation where people are being abused necessarily. There are certainly circumstances that should be called out, and bad actors should be held accountable. We're talking about wave after wave of migrant caravan being incentivized to come to the U.S. And when they do, they end up in overcrowded situations, sick and crawling through the desert. I gotta say, I don't have all the answers, but I certainly think we shouldn't be incentivizing people to come here with sanctuary cities. Seriously, it's irresponsible and it terrifies me. But perhaps it's all part of the rhetoric game being played by the Democrats. Create sanctuary cities, encourage people to come. Then once ICE does their job and puts them in these facilities, they say, aha, look what they're doing. And it makes everybody look bad. It's mind-blowing to me that when a kid dies from dehydration, they blame this CBP and ICE. And I'm like, blame the parents. They brought that kid through the desert without supplies. And then the only thing CBP did was actually try and help them. I'm sorry they couldn't help them enough. It's truly terrifying, I gotta say. Let's read the rest of this article. Controversial sanctuary policies are adamantly opposed by controversial sanctuary policies are adamantly opposed by immigration hawks and by federal immigration authorities themselves, who claim such laws make it much harder to do their job. The Florida anti-sanctuary bill was considered contentious when it was debated in the Senate legislature. Opponents questioned the necessity of the bill, pointing out that Florida currently has no sanctuary cities. The bill ultimately passed the state House by 68 to 45 and the state Senate by 22 to 18, despite facing stiff pushback from Democrats and immigration rights groups. Why, if there are no sanctuary cities, would anyone oppose the bill? I think it's a preemptive measure. I think the Republicans are saying put the law in now statewide, because once the Democrats come in, they'll start enacting these policies. So it stops it before it starts. And I think that's why the Democrats and immigration rights groups are pushing back, because they would absolutely like to have these policies in place given the opportunity. I'll end with the final thought, the question to you guys of whether or not cities should have a right to supersede the greater jurisdiction. If a city wants to enact a law, should they be allowed to if it violates the law of above them? If Chicago says, we want to ban guns, But federal law is that you cannot do that should the feds come and enforce that. How does that pertain to any other, any other law? And this is where, again, I'll throw it back to why I love America, because the judges ultimately decide, and it's not going to be just it is or isn't. It's going to be, well, let's listen. Guns and drugs are both very different things, even though they're both contraband in certain capacities. You have to respect federal law, or you don't. It depends. It depends. And I'll end with one final thought that keep in mind. Sometimes laws should be broken. Laws are not morals. Laws are things. There are laws saying like you can't bathe on Sundays in certain jurisdictions because it made sense back then, doesn't make sense today. So while I'm certainly not advocating for people to go out and break the law by no means. I'm recognizing that over time, some people end up breaking the law, and then we kind of rethink how these laws work. And so that's why, the way I put it is, marijuana is being legalized across the country. I completely agree with it. I'm on the libertarian spectrum here that people should have a right to ingest what they want to a certain extent. Admittedly, I'm a liberal, not a complete libertarian. I believe in freedom. But how would people know they wanted this unless people were breaking the law by smoking? So I don't know. Comment. Let me know what you think. It's interesting conundrum, ethically and morally and legally. Stick around. I got more segments coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you shortly.